First and foremost, big thank you to Bo and the whole UbrZati team for both having me back and for putting this event on. It's been something that's been really cool to listen to some of the other people that are here, getting to talk. It's definitely a privilege to get up here and be able to talk to all of you guys, share some of the information about some of the things that I do that can hopefully be at least mildly relevant to a few of you guys and maybe impacts the way that you guys train. So what I'm really going to try and talk about with you guys today is this idea of building pain-free performance. And so I'm really excited to particularly follow up right after BAM because it's so interesting that some of the parallels in what we're trying to accomplish, but some of the different ways that we're trying to do that. And so that's one of the big things that I'm excited to talk about here with you guys today, is to explore different reasons of why some people may do things differently, why some people may do things over here. What are some of the parallels and what are some of the things that you guys can find and take with you and use in your own training to help people perform better, help people come back from injuries, help people do all sorts of different things. So I've been working primarily in the return to sport space for the last kind of 5-ish years, helping athletes come back from a variety of injuries, but particularly ACL and other major knee injuries to be able to get back to playing their sport again, doing the hobbies, activities they want to do pain-free, and most importantly, stay there, trying to reduce some of the rates that we've seen of re-injury and different things like that. So one of the reasons that I'm excited to talk to you guys about this, even though so many of you guys are in more of the performance space, right? Like there's not a lot of actual kind of rehab people here, is because I think there's a lot of application and carryover of this concept, of this goal, this outcome, to the ability to perform better. I also think it's something that all of you guys, even in the performance space, are gonna have to deal with at some point, whether you want to or not. Pain, injury, all of these things are a part of sport and a part of life. One of the things I'm actually a little bit different with BAM is like, I think our goal is to have this as pain-free performance. I also don't think it's something that you're ever actually going to achieve. Or if you do, it's going to be a temporary state that we're going to then always be balancing, trying to get back into. If you want to do cool shit, you're probably going to hurt yourself a little bit along the way. So my goal is to be able to get people to move more in that direction, even if that's not something we're ever going to necessarily achieve. But can we make you a little bit more robust, a little bit more durable, able to handle the things that you want to do at a little bit of a higher level? And then when stuff does come up, big, small, are we more equipped to be able to handle that, deal with that, and get back to doing the things that we want to do a little bit quicker than we might otherwise? The other big reason, I truly believe that just getting people to be able to just feel good is probably the single best performance boost that you can give someone. More than trying to get someone faster, more than trying to get someone stronger. If I can just remove limitations, if I can get you to feel good at the level that you're already at, in the body that you already have, you're going to run faster, you're going to jump higher, you're going to express more creativity, better movement patterns that you already have within you. And so this is a big thing that I'm going to come back to a lot, but this idea of trying to remove inhibitions to allow for greater expression of what you already have, rather than some of the other people here that are trying to pattern specific movements or look for different outcomes. I almost look at it like subtraction almost more than addition, but that's something that we're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, but that's some of what we're going to get in here. So going to get into more of the interesting stuff, but just the quick background. Can you go ahead to the next one? I forgot when I change it, it doesn't go over there, so don't let me forget that. But just bachelor's, master's in exercise science and kinesiology. Played a little bit of college soccer, actually just right up the road here, funny enough, but ended up breaking my ankle, having surgery, and not having a particularly fun experience trying to come back from all of that. I've coached in 3 different collegiate weight rooms. I've coached kind of Gen Pop personal training. Some people actually put me in charge of coach education for personal trainers for a time being. I don't know why they did that. Worked a little bit in the kind of sports science department. So I've been in quite a few different environments. But now, like I said, I work primarily with Brian Kula out in Denver in more of the return to sports space, trying to help athletes come back from some of these injuries that have maybe done some PT, done some rehab, but are struggling to get to where it is that they want to be, get all the way back to playing. That is a lot of kind of what we're here for. So to get into that, I've had a lot of different mentors and different people that have been influential on my kind of coaching style over my career. A big one has definitely been Ben Patrick and ATG. I found him in kind of early 2019 before he was kind of big on social media. I got to train with him some out in Clearwater. And a lot of that methodology has been very influential for me in changing my own athleticism. I still remember I ran a 5.2 40-yard dash as an actual college athlete when I was playing soccer. And today I've run a 4.5 hand timed, a 4.6 on lasers, can run a 9.4 fly 10. I dunked for the first time at 27 when most people do that either at 18 or never at all. And then the application of some of these concepts with my athletes has been instrumental in my ability to work in this return to sports space. So to date, I've worked with over 150 athletes coming off of a various combination of ACL, MCL, meniscus tears, multiple surgeries, all of these different things. And of everyone who's completed their entire protocol with us, gotten the green light to go back ahead, we have not had a single re-injury in almost 5 years of doing this. So we have a really, really good track record of doing things a little bit differently, but being able to get people back doing the things that they want to be able to do.
Is that 150 here, or is that ATG as a whole?
No. ATG is doing their own thing. Those are all people all people that I've worked with directly. One thing I do want to touch on with that, I actually have had a couple of people that have gotten re-injured, 3 to be exact, but all 3 of them either kind of stopped training or went back ahead of recommendation. So there's somebody that I don't include in that total, but do just want to talk about that just for full transparency. But one of the reasons I'm very excited about that is when we look at the US, there are nearly 200,000 ACL tears every single year. Of that 200,000, only about half of those people will ever return to the level of sport that they were at previously. So if you were a college athlete, you tear your ACL, maybe you'll go play club, rec, that sort of thing, but only 1 out of 2 ever are going to play at the level that they were at before. Then of that half, another half will either re-tear or injure their opposite leg within the next 2 years. So we have a 25%, not failure rate, a 25% success rate in this industry of being able to get people back to their sport and stay there, if we define success as play your sport again and being able to stay there healthy, which I think is a decent marker. So we've got a really, really good track record compared to that industry average. And a big part of that is because we do things a little bit differently. And so some of those concepts of kind of what we do, why we do things a little bit differently are one of the big things I'm going to talk about today. Last thing with that too, the majority, not the majority, but a lot of those athletes that we've worked with that have been coming back from these different things have also not been your run-of-the-mill ACL recovery. Most of them are coming back from 2nd, 3rd, 4th surgery, multiple ligament tears, something they've dealt with multiple experts, physios, rehabs, and we're still having issues staying healthy. I've worked with a professional squash player coming off of his 4th ACL tear, a professional soccer player coming off of his 5th knee surgery before the age of 23, even a skier coming back from her 9th knee surgery who still wanted to be able to ski and do her things again. And we've been able to get all of them back to the places they want to be using some of these concepts that we're going to talk about. So one of the first things that I do want to talk about is I see my role as not to replace, but rather to complement or enhance the things that we're already doing well in the rehab space. PT is great for getting people back on their feet, able to get through their day-to-day, reducing symptoms. I'm not working with somebody fresh off of their ACL tear, but somebody that's been to a little bit of physio, that's done some of these things. Where they tend to struggle is getting all of the way there. Those last couple of steps, right? Actually feeling like themselves again. Fast, strong, confident, sharp, all of these different things. And I actually think this is a big contributing factor to why we see such high rates of re-injury, is that we get people just dangerous enough to hurt themselves again. So a lot of clearance protocols for rehab stuff is around 80%, 90% of a leg that they just spent the last 6 months barely training. And so we're getting them back to a point where they're at a state of lower readiness than they were when they got hurt in the first place, and then sending them back out there and expecting them to be successful. So right off the bat, like my goal with every single client that I work with is to get them to a higher level of readiness than they were at before they got hurt. If you got injured at your previous 100%, especially if that was a non-contact injury, to me, it only makes sense that that should be a minimum threshold that we're really trying to exceed or improve if we're going to have the best chance possible of trying to get people back to, again, playing their sport. And so I do always say kind of best chance because there are no guarantees in this, right? Like I work in this space and I still try and avoid the word injury prevention like the plague. Injury prevention is a myth. If you get hit by a bus, it is what it is. There's only so much that we as practitioners can actually do. But can we go above and beyond? Can we actually do everything possible in order to try and get people back to that state or get them as prepared as they possibly can be for all the things that they want to do? And this may sound like common sense, especially to a lot of you guys in more of like the performance space of obviously that we're going to try and get people better. Like that's what this whole thing is all about. But I do think it's really important, almost like Tony said with the class example that he talked about on the podcast yesterday, of setting the tone from day one. Of like, hey, this is our North Star. This is where we're trying to go. And this is going to dictate everything that we're going to do going forward in order to try to get you back there. So I think it's a very important kind of conversation to have. Tommy John has a really great line that I like, that you need a level of stimulus greater than what hurt you in the first place in order to truly heal. So that's what we're trying to get back to. I think about when it comes to ACL specifically of by the time that we're done, the only difference you should be able to tell between your knees is a scar. If you still have things months later, years later of, I still have this kind of in the back of your mind, that's because your body subconsciously knows, or literally knows, that we still have issues there. And so when some of the favorite kind of advice, or not advice, but some of the feedback that I'll get from athletes as they go and play again is, hey, I went and played my first game last night and I forgot about my knee. Or I took this big hit and I bounced right back up. Like that is where we're trying to get to the point where it's something that you no longer think about. And so this is something that I really want to talk about with all of you guys today, even again, those of you not directly in the rehab space, because I think there is a huge, huge, huge need for this kind of training. Return to Sports Specialist is a title that I made up because it sounds good. It kind of conveys what we're doing in a way that's fairly easy to understand and would hopefully keep the actual physios and people in medical space off my back for stretching what some might consider traditional scope of practice. So that's something that has worked so far, so we're going to hopefully keep that up. But the point of that is that you don't need a made-up job title to be able to start helping people with some of these things. I mean, Bam went through the example just 20 minutes ago of how many people in this room, people that are experts, specialists in their field and trying to take care of their body, are currently dealing with injuries, struggles, limitations, something that's holding them back from performing the way that they want to or just feeling as good as they want to. And so if that's the case in a room of people like this, like what do you think it's like out there, whether it's chronic low back stuff, whether it's a major injury that they're trying to come back from? So I do truly believe that everybody in this room has the ability to reach back a little bit and to be able to help people take those last couple of steps, because that I think is the real missing gap in the rehab space. Like the PT space is very limited by all sorts of things, right? The point of this is not to bash that model. They're very limited by the insurance model, the space that they have, the time, the ability that they're able to work with athletes, the amount of equipment that they have, all of these different things. So rather than expecting them to do more, can we do more from the performance space from our end to reach back and just help them take those last couple of steps? And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about are principles or concepts that we already know and understand as trainers, as performance guys, progressive overload, all of these different things. Can we just tweak that or scale that or apply that to some of these situations where people have these either small or big limitations in order to be able to effectively help some of these people get back to your more typical cohort of people that you're typically working with? And so that's why I'm actually excited to talk to you guys, because most of you guys are more in the performance space than the kind of physio space, is that I'm not a physio. I'm an S&C guy. Like I said, I'm working with a made-up job title, doing things that I may or may not be allowed to do, and we've been able to have great success doing that. And so I think if all of you guys can leave this just a little bit more comfortable, able to deal with a hamstring who tweaked their hamstring in practice, or somebody whose knee has been hurting them for the last couple of years while they've been trying to lose weight. If you just have one or two more kind of tools in the tool belt of things that you can be able to do to try and help that hamstring athlete get back in that group of everybody else and be able to perform with the team, help Sally who's trying to lose weight, not just work around her knee, but actually be able to do something about that, I think you can become exponentially more valuable to the people that you work with and have a much greater impact on all of those people as well. So to that point, because most of you guys are more in the performance space, I'm really going to try and focus a little bit more on principles and concepts than methods. So if some of this sounds a little bit kind of general rather than specific, I'm doing that on purpose because I don't want to turn this into an ACL rehab lecture, because I know most of you guys aren't in that space. So I want to try and make this as relevant as we possibly can to all of that. I see we've already gone ahead. That's cool. Stay there. And so a big part of what resonates with me about what we're trying to do is exactly that. Of a lot of what I'm going to talk about with this quote, like rehab, return to sports stuff, is good rehab is just good training. good training is rehab. And so most of you guys know how to train already. I'm not trying to get you to change the things that you do or try this different kind of method over here or tell you that everything that you do is wrong. Can we just apply some of these concepts and some of the skills that you guys already have to a slightly different demographic? And so what I like about this is I've had success with some of these methods, using the same methods just scaled up and down to a variety of different populations. Whether that's, I've got a couple of like suburban moms that just like to ski on the weekends in their mid-40s who are both coming off of meniscus surgery. And so with them, we're not jumping off of tables and slinging barbells and doing these things, but we've got them squatting on a slant board, like ass to grass. We've got them doing Nordics. And for them, that's badass. Like a 40-year-old middle-aged woman, like doing Nordics, like that's incredible. And so it's been able to give them a level of strength and confidence to be able to perform at the level it is that they want to do. Feel a little bit better than they were before, but then we'll take those same methods and our professional athletes will come in 6 days a week and we're going to absolutely smash them on the Z-treads and pulling sleds and doing all of these different things, and they're going to get better as well. And so we can use some of these same concepts. Again, it's just training is training, but can we scale this up or down? And then can we have that target of whether this person is extremely struggling in the situations that they're dealing with or whether they're at a high level? Can we just try and push the envelope? All we're trying to do is just get them better. And so that's why I'm so excited to follow up with somebody like Bam of, we have the exact same things that we're trying to do. Can I get you to move better, feel better, have less pain? And we're trying to do that by leveling up the person that you are right now. In whatever way, then that will change for the kind of stimulus that we're trying to provide, whether it's through a movement-based lens or all of these different things. That's what we're going to talk about right now. But this concept is also why I've felt very comfortable, willing to try and experiment and work with some of these people that I may not have the medical training, experience, clearance to be able to do something like this. Like that skier coming off of her ninth knee surgery. Like we're talking about 14 years of stuff that she's been dealing with, trying to keep her surgery total in single digits, which is crazy. And so when I'm talking with her, I don't know if off the top of my head, like I can fix your knee, but I know I can do something to try and get you just a little bit better than you were yesterday and a little bit better than you were the day before. And if we keep doing that for weeks and months and you do that for a long enough time, you can look up and really be kind of surprised with where you get people to, whether it's yourself or whether your own athletes. And so kind of like Bam talking about the permission to be the weirdo that's sitting on the floor doing whatever it is, like a big part of this for me is trying to give you guys permission to be able to try and reach back and try and help some of these people. And what we're going to get into now are some of the tools or skill sets that you can use to be able to try and do that in a way that gives you a little bit more confidence. Like obviously you guys don't want to hurt people, all of these different things. And so some few simple guide rails that can help you guys do that. We can go to the next one. So again, one of the reasons I'm really excited to speak at this conference specifically is because we have a lot of different people coming from very different schools of thought. We have people like Weck and Bam coming from more of this primal-based movement system where they're trying to prioritize or develop movement in a specific way as the primary driver of success and adaptation. Guys like Tony and guys like Kula are taking more of this performance-based, CNS-based approach where we're trying to level up the nervous system as the main thing that we're trying to pursue and achieve in order to level up performance. Where my stuff is a little bit different is I'm actually trying to focus more on the structure. Take a little bit of focus on the actual body, the actual tissue itself. Can I level up these pieces? Can I level up the vehicle, the vessel, the structure to then make everything else easier by comparison? Because if you're trying to play basketball, football, do whatever it is that you want to do, like that stimulus is going to stay the same, right? It's like football is football. If you want to play at the Division I level, these are the expectations. And so we're not going to change that. Like that stimulus is going to stay the same, but I can level up my body, my tissue, my structure to be able to handle all of those forces a little bit easier. So if we can improve, again, the capacity of your body to handle all of these things, everything else becomes easier by comparison. And so I really look at this as the kind of base of the pyramid, as the real foundation that some of these other skills are then built on. If we can do this well and effectively, you can go and express greater levels of movement, naturally. You can tap into that nervous system and use more of what you already have because we're removing some of those inhibitions, some of those limiters. And so I'm really interested in this concept specifically because, to be honest, like, we have people here performing at a very high level doing a lot of these different things, and it's not necessarily to say that I even think this way is the best. Like, I think it's a really interesting, if you just want to get into the whole like chicken or the egg argument. Does like our movement develop our tissue? Does our tissue develop our movement? And of course, I think it's something that affects one another. And so you could make the case that, well, the movement is going to be more global or foundational, and that's going to affect all of the tissue stuff, and that would be the primary way that I want to develop some of these systems. And conceptually, that actually makes a lot of sense to me. I agree with that a lot. And I think that works until it doesn't. So the explanation that when you talked about playing basketball is how, like, I used to play basketball, and this was great. This is a stimulus that's going to build my tissue, build my structures, build resilience, build different movement patterns, all of these different things, until I go and sprain my ankle. And then now trying to play basketball is something that's going to hurt or struggle, or something that's going to be a challenge because I now have this inhibition. So that same thing that was a positive stimulus is now becoming something that is, you could say, is detrimental until we fix the ankle. And so same thing with some of our kind of movement pattern stuff of, ideally, we're going to grow up in this perfect situation where I run and throw and swing and climb and I play 18 different sports and I'm outside all day and I'm doing all of these different perfect things. But most of us don't live in that situation, in that reality. And so we're stuck kind of living indoors, living in chairs, doing all of these different things. And so we're going to have so many of these different kind of issues pop up along the way. So if we can have a skill set around building the pieces, then we can remove some of those inhibitions. Then we can make it so much easier to develop all of those things on top of it, of better movement, of higher expression of our nervous system, all of these different things. And so that's why I really think this is, at least for the demographic that I work with, something that is very, very effective in terms of a concept or like first principles of what am I trying to do. And so a big piece of that too is when I talk about structure, tissue, I'm not talking just about muscle tissue. That's one of the criticisms that a lot of people in the movement space have about the bodybuilding world, the S&C world, all of these different things. I'm also really talking about connective tissue. And so that's something that we're going to get into in just a little bit in terms of actual methods. But the combination of those two has allowed everything else that we want to do in the biomechanics and the CNS space be more effective. And so another reason why that, just getting into, at least like I said, for me specifically, I'm a big fan of trying the simplest solution first. If you have a knee problem, if you tore your ACL and you're coming to me because you're trying to fix your knee, the first place that I'm going to look at is probably going to be your knee. We're going to get into feet and hips and biomechanics and all of these different things, but let's try the simplest thing first, see if that works, see how far we can get with that, and then start to layer in some of these things afterwards, then start to make things more complicated. And there's a time and place to be doing all the black belt voodoo where like you pull on someone's ear and their back pain disappears, like awesome, but that's probably not where I'm going to start with somebody. And so the more we can make things simple, predictable, repeatable, the better, the more consistent outcomes we're going to be able to have for the majority of people. And so when it comes to these different, if these are the three kind of systems or substructures that we're talking about, obviously none of these things are going to exist in isolation, right? All of these things are going to affect each other. But one of the things that I'm trying to do is, with my training, can we bias one of these versus the other? And this goes into the whole systems that we've been talking about. Feed the cats. We're obviously going very hard in trying to develop the CNS side of things, which is then going to develop biomechanics and structure. With primal movement and WEC method, we're trying to develop optimal biomechanics, optimal movement patterns to then develop structure and CNS, so we can use our training to deliberately try and bias or preference one of these different areas to get the specific adaptation that we're trying to go for. And so in addition to me being, yes, in the return to sports space, and so trying to fix people with actual structural issues, another reason that I'm a big fan of this idea of prioritizing the structure or the tissue first is because of the speed of adaptation of all three of those systems. So if we look at the nervous system, at the CNS, we can get adaptation, we can get progress within that system within a matter of days. Now, you can get a potentiation effect in minutes, but in terms of actual starting to create changes within the CNS, we can do that within a couple of days. If you think about the first time that we ever started working out, first time you ever started lifting weights, every week it's PR after PR, everything's getting better every single week. Why is that? It's because of newbie gains. It's not because we've developed tissue, it's because we've gotten better at firing, wiring, coordinating different movement patterns in order to motor unit recruitment, all of these different things in order to perform the task better. In terms of biomechanics or movement, that one's a little bit trickier because it takes a very long time to make some of these things automatic or conscious or subconscious. But we all just went through an hour-long session with Bam, and most of us are probably feeling a little bit better than we were before. I don't think he would still be in business if it took 8 weeks for somebody to feel the benefits of training 5 hours a day and feeling a little bit better, right? So I'm going to put it in the fast-moving category just because I need it to make my argument work. The very much slowest moving piece out of all three of those is going to be that tissues piece, especially when we start talking about the connective tissue side of things. This is something that is going to take weeks and weeks and months in order to start to develop in response to a stimulus that we are giving it. And so if all three of these systems interact, and if that's going to be the slowest moving variable, it's obvious, that's the word we're going for. Often, there we go, often going to be the rate limiter in terms of your continued progress. So when it comes back to that newbie gains example, right? Like we're getting better week over week over week, and eventually that starts to slow down. Why? It's because we cannot continue to level up our nervous system to improve our firing patterns and our motor unit recruitment endlessly because our brain is fundamentally trying to prioritize protection over performance. It is going to be inhibitory more than anything else. So it's not going to let us level up beyond a level that it thinks we can handle. And so it's going to take the time then to be able to develop all of the tissue to be able to handle the tasks that we're trying to give it, so that way we can start to perform at a little bit of a higher level. And so my goal, one of the things that I'm going to be talking about a lot with the athletes that I work with, but we're just trying to remove some of those inhibitions. So can I convince my brain that it's safe to be able to do the things that it wants to do so that it can express higher levels of power, express greater levels of movement. And so that's a way that I think about the training side of things a lot. It's not about trying to add something, it's what can I take away? What is getting in your way of performing at the next level? And this applies to the ACL athlete who's 6 weeks post-surgery, but this also applies to your combine guys. Like the principle is the same. Like, is it his start that sucks? Is it his acceleration? Is it his top end? Do his mechanics need work, or does he just need to get more explosive? So the concept of, can I find what is your limiting variable right now? Can I eliminate that through training? And then can I go on to the next one? And I think this is a really powerful concept because I think this is probably one of the single unifying skills that all great coaches have across demographics, across sports, is they can identify in an individual, okay, this is the thing that is holding you back from getting to where it is that you want to go. And regardless of what systems, methods, training modalities they use, they're able to kind of take that and recognize, all right, this is getting in your way. Can we do this to be able to go to the next level? And so I apply this concept, whether, again, it's my ACL athletes that are just trying to get back onto the field or somebody who wants to run faster. Like, what is the thing that's getting in your way of being able to do that? And so I really, really like this graphic because I think it illustrates this concept a lot. And I've said it already, but like the whole idea is that good rehab is good training and good training is good rehab. And so if a lot of these concepts that I'm talking about are like, yes, okay, that's common sense for somebody that we're working with in order to develop an athlete, develop an individual just to perform at a higher level, that's because I want to intentionally talk in those kind of frameworks, but also because I think that's how you guys can apply it to people in a much wider variety of situations, demographics than you may currently be dealing with. And so like I kind of joked earlier of like, you don't need to have a made-up job title in order to be able to do this. Start calling yourself a return to sports specialist and an ACL rehab expert and all of these different things. But when Sally is coming to you because she's trying to lose 30 pounds, but she's had back pain for the last couple of years, or the NFL guy who's already performing at a high level, he's running a 4.4, but he's hooked on Advil and PRP injections to get him through every single season. Like, can we do a little bit more for that person than just working around the things that they've got going on? Can we actually do something to address that in the first place? And one of the reasons I think this is so important is because the only other voices that either of those two are feeling, Sally or our NFL guy over here who's playing at the highest level, are injections, pills, surgery, stop doing XYZ activity, you're going to hurt yourself. So if you guys in this room, if we're not able to actually do something about that ourselves, those are the only options that they're looking for. And so the only other options that are being presented to them. And so that's why I think this is so important, because I do think that everybody in this room, regardless of if you're going to try and work in this rehab space or not, you have the ability. It's really not that far away. It's just a small adjustment to be able to make such an impact on people that are dealing with all of these sorts of things, because we've already talked about how many people are dealing with small stuff, big stuff, pain, injuries, all of these different things. And I truly believe that everybody in this room can have a real positive impact on that. So that's the soapbox speech, at least. Just a little kind of nugget for more of the performance guys to try and reel you guys back in if you guys aren't quite the bleeding heart sucker that this guy up here might be. I do think there are real performance applications when it comes to applying these methods as well. I already told you about my halfway decent athletic transformation. You've probably seen Ben's freakishness on Instagram, which honestly I think we've gotten numb to or is underrated. Like the amount of things that dude can do from where he came from to what he can do now is pretty nuts. But I don't know how many of you guys train people that can dunk, but how about training people that can hit their head on the rim? Or in this case, 4 of them. And these are not professional athletes that are getting paid millions of dollars. Like these are ATG coaches that sit and work on a laptop all day. So like I'm a big fan of trying to follow performance, trying to follow results even more than theories, degrees, all of these different things, and that's not bad.
Not bad at all.
Not bad. So one of the simplest frameworks to start to actually be able to apply this stuff is what to do when someone presents with pain, right? Like that's the place that most of you guys are going to start of, hey, this hurts, I don't know why. So what do we do when we're presented with pain, with a client that we're working with presents with pain? The simplest thing is this is actually going to be the real guide rail or framework that is going to direct everything that we're going to do. So first and foremost, when something is painful, I want to, just recognize that fact of being able to actually kind of listen and use that as information of like, hey, our body is telling us that we have a problem here. There is some sort of dysfunction, something that it's not happy with. There's a level of stimulus that we are introducing from our life that our body is not happy with or not able to deal with at the level that we want to. And so when it comes to training, the simplest thing that we want to do is not make it worse, right? Like in general, pain is actually a very complex thing to get into. There's the whole biopsychosocial model if you want to get into that messy web of nonsense. But the much easier kind of guide rule for you guys to apply is first and foremost, let's not make it worse, right? So when our training, if something is painful, can I not make it worse? That's what most people are pretty good at in terms of just avoiding the issue. But then can we do something to actually work on why that pain is there in the first place? And so I want that symptom to go away because if I could choose between hurting or not hurting, I would rather not hurt. But also, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, guys. Don't make it worse. Okay, so we're going to skip ahead to the actual what to do. So if something hurts, I want it not to. And so the way that we're going to do that, first rule is like Hippocratic oath, right? Of like, first, do no harm. Let's not make it worse. But then the flip side of that, where that is useful for me is like, okay, as long as I'm not making it worse, the more I can now do, the better. And so this is where I think it's really empowering for all of you guys. And we talked about giving permission to do these different things of like, now it's a very easy rule to follow. Does this hurt? Yes, no? Okay, well, if this is similar to the thing that I want you to be able to do, the more of that I can do, the greater the level of stimulus that I can give you, the more we're now going to heal, adapt, and get stronger. So it's the simplest way to kind of 2 birds with 1 stone. Make sure I'm not making it worse, and then it's also my guide rail to make sure I can do as much of this thing as I can in order to get a stimulus to heal, adapt, get stronger without making things worse. And now, the one thing about that too is ideally we would like this to be in a way that is as close as possible or as specific to the actual thing that they're dealing with. If your knee hurts and I've got you doing battle ropes, that's great. It doesn't hurt, it doesn't make it worse, but it's probably not going to fix the source of the problem. So what I'm trying to do, and a lot of where this becomes an art as much of a science, is I'm just trying to kind of poke and prod at all of these different things to try and figure out, okay, where are your hot spots? What stuff does not feel very good? But then where's our entry point as well? What sort of things can I do to start to make a positive impact on some of these things and start moving the needle? And so like I said, one of the most powerful things about this is that permission to train and permission to train hard. But the other reason that I really, really like this concept for all of you guys, and before even talking about how we do some of this stuff, is all that really is load management and progressive overload. Like that's it. And all of you guys as coaches already know those rules, already know how to do that within your own skill set that you have. And so if we can just apply that to a site that's injured and then just not make it worse, we can have a really, really profound effect on eliminating why that's there in the first place, and then also leveling up their ability to perform, do whatever it is that they're trying to do. And so the concept that I really, really like with, next one. So the concept that I really, really like with this and find really helpful is I'm trying to think about gaining access or expand the vocabulary or range or amount of things that they can do. I almost think about this like a target that I'm trying to circle and kind of pinpoint and shrink down until we can get that to disappear entirely. And so what's useful about that is, and one of the reasons I've been able to work with people that have had so many of these nasty issues is because you only need one entry point. So you might try 15 things with all of these different people that they all don't respond well. Something doesn't feel good, but if you can find that one thing that's fairly similar to what it is that they want to be able to do, and that feels okay, then now we can work really hard, take that away, and then next time we can come back and maybe we can do 2 things. And so it's really just kind of playing around, using some experimentation to then see what is that access point? What's that entry point where now I can start to get a positive stimulus into this area that was not being able to be stimulated in a positive way or being overstimulated, however you want to think about that. And then can I just slowly expand, can I widen that crack of the amount of things that they are able to do? And so like I said, this applies to the ACL athlete who's 4 weeks post-surgery, but this also applies to your basketball athlete whose shoulder hurts when you try and bench. Like rather than taking this response that most people do of let's just bench to boards and just shorten the range of motion, can we lighten the load, work through a greater range of motion, and try and get rid of why that pain is there in the first place? All right, we can go to the next one. And so this has been able to apply to a variety of situations much more than just knees and ACLs. The very first client that I ever worked with when I went out on my own is the guy over here on the right, who is coming back from a corrective surgery where they broke his leg, moved it, and then stuck it in a metal cage with like rods crisscrossing the whole thing for 6 months. And then he came to me and was like, my shin hurts, my knee hurts. I was like, no shit. But so we applied some of these concepts, again, of just this little bit of progressive overload, of just seeing, can we do just a little bit more today than we were able to do yesterday? And we were able to get him back playing soccer, doing all the things that he wants to do. One of the reasons I'm mad at Tony for not being here right now is because he talked yesterday about hamstring stuff and the Nordic not being a great exercise for hamstring injuries. And I agree with him, actually. But another case study that I had was this kid over here on the left who was a high-level soccer guy who tore a literal hole in his hamstring. Like he tore his hamstring so bad. Like it looked like someone had took a spoon and scooped out a chunk of dude's hamstring. And so we did a bunch of work together and we were able to get him back to playing again, dunk at 5'9", and PR his fly 10. Like possibly his most hamstring dominant thing that you're gonna do. And so a little bit of a, not tangent here, but getting away from some of the connective tissue piece that we're about to talk about, is that one of the big ways that we were able to do that was through manipulating exercise selection. So in addition to the connective tissue piece that I'm going to talk about here in a little bit, we can use, excellent timing. I was just talking about you and your hamstrings. Yeah, now it's all okay. So I had a kid who tore an actual hole in his hamstring. Tore it so bad, tore it off the bone, all of that stuff that we got back to PR his fly 10. And so Nordics were a useful piece, but it was not the exercise with that. When I look at Nordics, I actually like that way, way more for ACLs. Because when we think about the strength curve of that, one, that's a much more kind of knee-dominant hamstring exercise than a more of a hip-dominant exercise. And it's going to be hardest right down in those tendons, right behind the knee, right where that ACL inserts. And so getting really, really strong there, that's it. Oh, fuck. Is going to be a very effective way to help prevent ACL injuries. But when it comes to sprinting, where does everybody tear their hamstring? way up high, right underneath their ass, right? So that high hamstring. And so the most effective exercise that I've used for that is a single leg back extension on like a 45-degree back extension with a very kind of kyphotic, like kind of rounded posture where you get a ton of hamstrings, ton of glutes, because the location of that is the exact same spot where everybody pulls their hamstring. And it was one of the biggest exercises I used with that. So you can do it on a glute ham, but I prefer it on a 45 degree. So, you know, like the 45 degree back extension. So it's a back extension on that machine, but most people, when they do that, it's just all extended up here. Most people do Nordics that way too, which is why I don't think they do them as well as they should. But if we intentionally round a little bit here, we take away the use of that low back. And so if we stay here, if we stay just slightly crunched now, all of the extension is going to come from hip and hamstring. And so you're going to feel that light up, that high hamstring right underneath the glute. And so that's for hamstring strain specifically has been probably the single most effective exercise that I've used for people coming back from hamstring injuries. But it also illustrates the concept of when we talked about structural stuff, right? If we can manipulate exercise selection to get very specific with where we're trying to get a specific adaptation to deal with someone who has an acute stuff, but then also evaluate people on a very kind of global scale of a lot of guys are great at Nordics, but suck at those. And they have issues with sprinting or vice versa. They're really great at kind of one or the other. And so it's a little bit of tangential from what I'm really going to focus on. Apparently I don't have much more time to focus on anything. Can we go to the next? Oh, Mike, what a hero. So one of the reasons that I'm really interested in, again, that structural piece comes down to the connective tissue piece. We've talked already about how much injury rates are going up across the board, and there's lots of reasons of why that is, right? Poor lifestyle, early sports specialization, all of these different things. But I do think that if we in this industry are being honest with ourselves and take a look kind of industry-wide, we are at the very least not doing a good enough job of mitigating some of these rising injury rates. And I think the case could be made that we could even be contributing to some of them. And so an interesting meta-analysis that came out was this one trying to figure out like where are a lot of these injuries occurring, specifically in like muscle strains. And they looked at over 1,500 different injuries, different muscle strains, and the vast majority of them were occurring either in the intramuscular connective tissue, so like all of the different layers of fascia that kind of like Russian dolls over all of your muscle fibers, or in the myotendinous junctions, so the connection where the tendon joins the joint. Only 12% of all of the actual injuries that occurred specifically in the muscle belly. And so it's just an interesting snapshot of potentially it is this connective tissue piece where we are missing in terms of development. And I think another reason that this kind of holds water for me is that I don't think anyone would say kind of industry-wide or athlete-wide that we are not the strongest we've ever been, the most explosive we have ever been in terms of all of these demographics from youth to pro. So it doesn't seem like a strength issue, like we're breaking world records at every Olympics. The issue is that we're breaking down. And so coming back to that rate limiter piece that we talked about before, it is potentially that we are revving up or we are improving our ability to perform, explode at a greater level than we can handle. And so it's the tissue, the body that is breaking down. And so then anything that we can do in order to maybe facilitate that process, that development of that connective tissue piece, of that slowest moving variable, then it's something that may at least have an ability to kind of mitigate some of these injuries or potentially even improve performance. And so I'm going to go a little bit quicker, but we talked about, there's lots of different ways to do this, right? And heavy strength training is great for improving connective tissue, slow eccentrics, isometrics, all of these different things are tools that are kind of already in the tool belt. But one that I think has been particularly useful for me, particularly useful for knee stuff, is working through some of these deeper ranges of motion. So some of these, the deep flexion moment at the knee, or even for other joints, some of these more extended stretch positions for the chest, the shoulder, whatever that is. The reason being, when we look at the knee, it's great for circulating some of the synovial fluid that's within the joint itself. This is the main mechanism of delivery for all of those internal connective tissues that are within the knee. One of the reasons that ACLs and some of these other things take so long to heal is because they have next to no blood supply, right? So they're very slow to adapt, to heal, to get stronger. And so anything that we can do, the more we can circulate this synovial fluid that can help soothe joint surfaces, hydrate, lubricate some of those structures, tissues. There's some emerging evidence that there may even be evidence for kind of reducing arthritis, healing cartilage, which are some of these tissues that we didn't maybe necessarily understand had healing properties. But even more than that, there's also evidence that we can start to strengthen the actual tendons and ligaments inside the joint. And so anecdotally, I think this is a real secret sauce that has been highly, highly effective for me in tying together a lot of what we do with our ACL athletes and why we haven't had a single re-injury despite someone who's coming off of multiple ligament tears, multiple surgeries, which should statistically drastically increase their rates of re-injury. And it's because we can not just strengthen the muscle tissue around the joint, we can strengthen all the internal structures within the joint itself. We can actually get stronger from the inside out. And so some supporting evidence for this too is that we've seen in studies hypertrophied, thicker tendons and ligaments in the knee in Olympic weightlifters that we haven't necessarily seen in bodybuilding and powerlifting. And so it's interesting because that would suggest that it's not necessarily a function purely of load, but of load and position. If we think about snatch, clean, like where these guys are catching some of these deeper loads, it is that stretched position in the knee, and that we now know is inducing mechanical load on some of these internal structures, some of these connective tissue structures, the tendons, the ligaments, the things like that. And so the graded exposure to that, because we know it's going to take forever for this stuff to happen, but taking more of a long-term, slow development approach to building some of these tissues, I think has been highly, highly effective in improving the resilience of some of these athletes coming back from some of their sports. And the last thing about that too is I almost look at this as like the anti-sport specific. Of everything in sport is going to be short range of motion, it's going to be fast, it's going to be here, it's going to be very bouncy. So can we in training give them the things that they are not getting? I'm a real big fan of that idea when it comes to training. I think we undervalue the amount that sport and training is a stimulus in and of itself. And so if you're training 4 days a week, 5 days a week in some fast, elastic activity, can we do just a few things to maybe give you the other side, some of the things that you're not getting with training, to make you just a little bit more balanced, a little bit more well-rounded to be able to handle some of those things?
Is it safe to say that, what you were just saying is that we're really not into this specific position, but there are times in sport when that position does happen?
Yes, I think that's not the real benefit of these, though. And I think that's a rare enough occurrence that, like, there's the one clip, the famous clip of Michael Jordan, like, falling back like that, and he kind of bounces back up, and that's awesome. But I think the sport-specific side of that, of like, oh, this is the angle that I shoot when I go for a takedown, like, maybe we get some benefits there. But I think it's more of the tissue piece of why that's so useful, is if I get my tendons and ligaments stronger, even if it's not in that position that I'm going to use them, that's going to make me more elastic, more bouncy, able to use them in any other situation. You can go to the next one. And so why I also think that's useful and why I focused on that more than some other kind of modalities like isometrics and different things like that for tendons is one, again, give them what they're not getting, but also we're going to get a different response from all of these connective tissues from slow loading through some of these greater ranges of motion than we will from fast dynamic actions like sprinting. So that's why I think it's a great complement to some of the speed and sprinting stuff, because we can almost work at it from, if we think about like that performance pyramid of like the bottom up as well as top down. Because in terms of like fast dynamic activities, sprinting, jumping, that sort of thing, our connective tissue is going to behave like a sheet, like one single unit that is going to be an energy storage system that's going to kind of help improve transfer of energy. If we think about tendons specifically, tendon anatomy, you could think about it as it's a bunch of different ropes that are all tied together. And when we stretch it fast, when I run, when I jump, all of those little ropes behave as one single unit, one single sheet. When I get into some of this more slow loading stuff, we can actually get into more individual fibers and cells in the tendons, in the connective tissue. And so we can create more of a stimulus to heal. Jake Tura is someone who's a really, really good resource in this. If you're interested in this stuff, he's great with tendon stuff, and he has a line that slow for health, fast for performance. And so the combination of the two, I think, is really, really useful to get different adaptations that you may not get just from sprinting alone. Wrong way. Yeah, perfect. All Almost done, Bo, I promise. So one of the interesting things too coming out of that kind of connective tissue study, Robert Schleip is someone who's one of the kind of leading experts in the kind of emerging world of like fascia. And one of the things that he talks about when it comes to fascial development, for lack of a better term, fascial fitness, is the effect of these kind of long stretching type movements on creating an adaptation within some of the fascia. So along some of those like fascial lines that we see in anatomy trains. And so that's one of the interesting things, if we just touch on that exercise selection piece, that I think is really useful when it comes to development, is the deep stuff, that deep flexion is gonna be really, really great. It's gonna be very jointy. It's gonna be great for developing those tendons, those ligaments, and different things inside the knee, versus something like a sissy squat, just as an example, to see the difference is how the hips are extended in the sissy squat. So if you've ever done one of those, it feels much more of like that pulling, stretching, kind of tearing sensation throughout the muscle. And so that's gonna have more of an impact on that intramuscular connective tissue piece. And so just when we come wrapping it all up to talk about structure and that sort of thing, those are two different ways of some of these long, extended range of motion pieces, and then movements where we're trying to close the joint all the way. We can get a very thorough, very complete development of, again, that connective tissue piece, but with slightly different styles. One's a little bit more jointy, one is that intramuscular connective tissue, but both are important, so I think there's useful tools for that. One last piece on tendon stuff as well. They also respond to, so kind of 3 different tools that we can use to get into that very, very high rep stuff, or kind of blood flow style training. They've actually started to kind of learn more about the discovery of like microcapillaries within tendons themselves. And so with high repetitions, we can actually get some blood flow into the tendons themselves. Louis Simmons had an old hamstring tendon protocol way back in the day that was like a seated hamstring curl, I think with a band, for like 75 reps. Because that high reps that really helps drive blood flow into the tendon. And so that's one of the reasons that if any of you guys have seen all the ATG stuff, the sleds for the knees, the backwards is great, but what it's really about is trying to drive blood flow into those connective tissues.
Can you explain the retro and why it's so effective, or why you guys feel going retro either on the tread or going steady?
Yeah, 100%. So the main thing about those, the trick with that is that it's something that's called concentric only. So if we think about, like we all know, like it's the eccentric on like a squat that rips up muscle fibers, leaves you sore, loads the joints, all of these different things, right? When I go backwards, when I drag a weight backwards, that eccentric piece is essentially weightless. When I go and step back here, there's no resistance. It's not until I put my foot in the ground and push through that concentric portion that I have to overcome any resistance. So it's a really, really great way to get a ton of blood flow into the tissue, into the muscle, into the joint, while being very, very gentle on the joint itself. And so that's why it's the starting point for so many of these knee things, is because it allows us to do a few things. It allows us to warm up the body so that it's more receptive to some of these more aggressive positions. Like these are something that I'm gonna do last in a training session, not first. It's also a great way, it's a great stimulus in and of itself to get blood flow into the joint and into the tissues. It's something that you can do very, very hard without leaving you sore. So I will smash guys on the sled, and you can come back and you can do it again the next day. And so for the rehab side of things specifically, somebody coming off of an ACL tear, it's amazing because it's such a great entry point where you can now start to work hard, you can feel like yourself again, and you can come back and do it again tomorrow. So for my guys with knee stuff, I'm like, dude, go 5 minutes on the sled, go until you want to die, lay down on the floor, come back and do it again tomorrow. And so when it came back to this very first thing we talked about of can I get a high level stimulus, that's something where I can get a huge stimulus and at a high frequency, and then it's going to make everything else I do afterwards very much more receptive. So that's where it's a useful tool in and of itself, and also helps everything else.
Replacement wise, and like say outside of like rehab, say you had like an athlete that doesn't need rehab, but you still wanted to implement like these 3 types of movements, where would you place it at? Like, or in the beginning, or like in, or actually inside the movement?
Yeah, good question. It's something that the classic answer, it depends. That's how I sound really smart. But I would probably say like where this stuff fits best in a Feed the Cats program, in a traditional like kind of S&C program, is more of like your accessory stuff. You can definitely, I mean, obviously Ben and ATG has made that the thing, all right? Of like, it's going to, like, we're gonna squat, but we're going to do deep squats on a slant board. We're gonna do hamstring work, but we're gonna do Nordics, whatever it is. So I think you can get a use case for both of those. I would guess, I would just say what you're trying to work on, you know what I mean? But is there something specific? Can I give you a little bit more than that?
Just because like I thought about implementing like deep squats, like deep range of motion work with like slight weight, but also wanted to do like explosive movements as well. So it's like, do I sacrifice the explosive movements for the deep range?
Yeah. I've got something for you in just a second. Actually, you put thoughts together for me too. One last quick thing on the sled. I've also used, so it's the magic of it is not the sled itself. It's that we can get a high stimulus in a very gentle format. But you can also, I've used it for the hamstring guy. You can use a forward sled variation where it's like a very stiff-legged guy right here. You're pulling it behind you, and it's this very stiff kind of walk. And again, it's the same concept of, can I get a shit ton of blood flow into the area that's problematic? It's gonna be very, very analgesic. It's gonna help kind of heal recovery, and it's gonna make everything else that I do afterwards a little bit friendlier, a little bit more useful. So just a kind of quick use case of how you can apply that in other areas. Next one, so last one. So this should hopefully kind of answer your question. This has been a framework that I've just kind of started to think about recently, but has been the most useful way I've been able to take all of these concepts and try and put it together, try and see where it goes in a program, try and organize some of this stuff. And so when I gave that example earlier of the basketball guy with the shoulder issue if he benches, right? A very common thing that people will do is put boards on his chest so that way he can work through a lower range of motion, but then still keep the weight. And so my solution was, okay, well, can we take away the boards? Can we lighten the weight and work through a greater range of motion? But based off of my argument, if our whole goal was just to get a high-level stimulus without anything being uncomfortable, if putting the boards away took away the pain and he was now able to train with a high-level stimulus without pain, why is that a bad thing? Or why am I trying to do something different? And so this framework was really helpful for me in terms of thinking about, how do I prioritize this stuff? What do I want to get first? So starting with access. So for my guys with knee stuff, if you're coming off of an ACL, when I think about access, can I just start to poke at that knee? Can I get it to move through whatever range of motion feels good as gently as I possibly need to in order to start to wake things up, get it moving again, get it working in a way that is positive? So can I just get access to that joint or that muscle, that problem site? And I can do that in as gentle of a way as I need to, just to make it positive. Can I just start to gently poke at that guy who has a hamstring issue in as gentle of a way as I need to in order to get a positive stimulus? Then next place I want to start to develop or challenge is reps. Like, okay, now I've got access here. Now can I poke at it a lot? Can I start to get higher reps here? And so this is both a friendlier way to get a high level of stimulus without loading somebody. If I get you to do 5 minutes on the sled, for example, it's very, very gentle on the joint, but it's also very hard. So now I'm starting to get more of a higher intensity stimulus in order to heal and adapt, but I'm not putting a ton of weight on you or on a healing joint or all of these different things. A real quick anecdote too for people with chronic pain is one of the biggest things that you'll see with chronic pain versus some of the acute stuff is that it is very inhibitory neurologically. So if you have knee pain, what can you not do when you squat? Feel your quads. It's very interesting, very counterintuitive, like neurologically, of why we would do that. But you will usually get either pain or muscle activation. So if you have a day where like, oh, I'm actually feeling pretty good today. Like I can actually feel my knee doing the things that it wants to do. You can get a little bit more quads. But days that it's just really pissed off, everything hurts, can't get your quads talking at all. So the reps piece is a really, really great way to start to restore kind of optimal firing patterns of, hey, I want to use the muscle when I bend the joint, not dump all the load into the joint itself. And so this is useful for people coming off of surgery where they have atrophy, but also the difficult ability trying to fire the muscle, but then also people in some of those more chronic pain situations just to get them to start to be able to use that muscle again. Next place I would go is range. So now can I start getting into some of these deeper ranges of motion, some of these deep squats, some of these deep split squats, but in a way that's as gentle as possible, still make it kind of friendly, accessible. then I will start to load, and then I will start to kind of add speed. So those are the kind of priorities that, coming back to your question, even for some of the more performance standpoints, that's kind of how I would start to introduce stuff. But that's also the kind of long-term progression that I want to use for people going through like an ACL recovery of like, okay, I want to provide a hard stimulus today, but how do I structure this over the course of the next 6 months? Like, where are we trying to go? Those are some of the places that I would think about. So can I just start to access some of those deep ranges of motion just as some accessory work? Then can I start to do that for maybe kind of high rep stuff? Then can I start to get into some of these deeper ranges of motion, load it, and then maybe add speed in terms of either reintegrating that into running, sprinting, jumping, or doing different things like that. So I wanted to intentionally keep that a little bit, keep this whole kind of talk, sorry, you can go to the last one, a little bit more conceptual, because like I said, I know most of you guys are not directly in the rehab space. For those of you guys that do want to go into more of the actual kind of methodology, if you can tolerate listening to me for another hour, I put in a whole kind of hour-long thing on YouTube going through some of the major exercises that I use specifically for ACL rehab stuff, why we use them, how we use them, what are the technical cues that we're going to use to try and get the adaptation that we want, what are some of the progressions, regressions, and then how do I actually structure those in an actual workout and then in a long-term progression. So it's literally me talking for an hour about 4 exercises. Was not supposed to take that long, but obviously I'm capable of rambling just a little bit. But if you want to go a little bit more specific or deep dive into some of the actual methodology, that would be a great place to start. I think Bo's going to get me off of here. If we have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. But otherwise, thank you guys very much for your time.